Hey guys, it's Slowpally here with another video, and today we're going to actually be going over the changes that are going to be happening in patch 11.8. So if you don't know right now, there's going to be some huge landscaping changes to the enchanter items. So as you can kind of see right on our screen before we go super deep into it, it's going to be changes to Moonstone, Shurelya's, and Staff of Flowing Water, which are the important things to kind of tackle for all enchanters moving forward. So, as you can see right here, Starlight's Grace, which is basically just the name of the heal, is going to go from 50 to 100 healing based on ally level to 60 as a flat rate. And then the Grace that you used to get in combat, the bonus healing, the longer you stayed in combat, the more healing it received, was 12 to 50%, is now going to be changed to increasing healing and shielding by 4% up to 20%. And then afterwards, they're also altering the mythic passive to no longer give ability haste and instead increase the Starlight's Grace heal by 10. So going up to 70, 80, 90, 100, etc. Next is the Shurelya's. They're going to be removing Inspire, which no longer empowers the next 3 damaging instances to deal bonus magic damage, and instead alter it and put a passive on it called Motivate, which is empowering or protecting allies, healing, shielding, etc. Grants both allies, basically you and your teammate, 25% movement speed over 1.5 seconds. And then the mythic passive is now being moved from 3% movement speed over to the ability haste. So as you can kind of see right here, they've shifted the ability haste from here into the Shurelya's passive instead, just to try and make its stat budget a little bit better. Also, they're making Staff of Flowing Water change so that it no longer grants movement speed and ability power, but instead will now grant ability haste and 20 to 40 ability power, and the duration is up for 4 seconds. So kind of just to before we jump into each individual one and what I think, etc. Main things to take away from this is Moonstone Renewer will no longer heal as much, but instead give you healing, shielding power. And no longer have ability haste. They took the ability haste and moved it into Shurelya's, and they took the movement speed from Staff of Flowing Water, and then they put it into the Shurelya's itself. So let's just go over each of the things one at a time, and we'll start actually with Shurelya's, and then we'll kind of go into Moonstone and Staff because they kind of work in tandem with each other. So the changes to Shurelya's is I think a pretty interesting change. They're pulling away a lot of the powers. You can kind of see right here for your vision, a little bit more visually. And they're going to make it so healing or shielding your teammate grants them 25% discane movement speed for 1.5 seconds. I would immediately say that in general, this is a buff for the item since they took power away, as you can see right here, from the bonus magic damage, which was kind of just a useless stat that they just put on to try and make it competitive with things like Mandate. So I think this is a good change, but the problem that I have is as you can see right here, Staff of Flowing Water used to grant movement speed for 3 seconds. So getting only a 1.5 second movement speed, and the movement speed is only 25%, is not very good. So I think conceptually, I understand what they're doing with the item, and I like that. But the problems that I have with it are mostly numerics. So number one, I think this cooldown is too long, 75 seconds, if you compare it to basically any mobility item in the entire game, Rocket Belt, Stride Breaker, Prowler's Claw, etc. They have significantly way faster cooldowns than other items, so I think that this is probably something that needs to be closer to about 60 seconds if I was to change it. And also, I feel like the decaying movement speed buff is way too low. 1.5 seconds speed is, or 1.5 seconds is quite low, basically not negligible in most cases, and maybe they're just concerned with chaining these together, but maybe making a built-in CD or something like that would be really great and bump this to 2.5 seconds or maybe even 3. They could even also change the mythic passive to not only give ability haste, but then increase the movement speed duration by like 0.25 seconds for each legendary that you have. Overall, I think Shurelya's will not be a bad item in the next patch. Like, you will probably build it on a couple of champions. Rakan comes to mind for the most part, and maybe you run into scenarios where you just kind of want to stack movement speed. They have a lot of running champions at you, so this is not a terrible option now, and it's kind of a 2-for-1 since you don't have to get to Staff of Flowing Water anymore as your secondary item to get the movement speed. Overall, I think this is a good direction. I just don't really think that the numbers are quite correct right now, but the concept itself is really good, and you'll probably find yourself building this every once in a while when you want to kite out, especially if they continue to keep the same jungle meta with lots of chem tank builders. So as enchanters, this is a good scenario for any time that you want to kite in and out of team fights. Really like the direction that they're going with the item, although in general I always felt like this item should have just been a legendary and not a mythic. But let's talk about the real important changes, which are going to be the Moonstone Renewer changes and Staff of Flowing Water in tandem to each other. So a really important thing to note is that Moonstone Renewer's mythic passive will no longer have ability haste, and instead will have basically a useless passive. I basically call this a useless passive because if you want to look at math real quick, the levels of which the power level of the old Moonstone was pretty high. The Moonstone itself actually healed for an abundance of it. So we want to compare, post nerf versus pre nerf, or post versus pre, 50 to 100. So that means that you get 2.8 per level. On average, you're usually healing people who are like level 9, level 10-ish when you complete this item. If you're rushing it, maybe they're even higher level, like level 11. And so that rounds out just, to give a conservative, to about 75 healing before we even consider the up to 50% extra healing that you can receive from the bonus stacking. Whereas nowadays, it'll be 60 plus 1 legendary, which is, if you didn't know, if you finish your quest on your Spell Thieves or Relic, etc., it's counted as a legendary completion. So that means that you will usually be starting with 70 base. As you already see, there's kind of some healing nerfs on that. On top of this, then you will also no longer receive the bonus healing from the Moonstone stacking itself. So you'll lose the 12.5% and up to 50% afterwards. The supplementary is going to be 20%. Now, the main thing is whether or not your champion heal or shields enough to make up for the difference for the healing that you receive on Moonstone versus the healing you receive on your kit. Overall, I'm going to tell you right now that in most cases, you will probably lose a good amount of healing and shielding, which basically means that this is just a significant nerf to you because of the fact that you're no longer also getting ability haste. Ability haste is basically the premium stat on almost every enchanter because just being able to shield and heal more frequently is value and power. It's basically the most important stat in the entire kit. So I think this is a huge nerf to enchanters in general for your 1 item power spike. You'll usually heal for a bit less. Maybe you scale a little bit more when you start stacking more healing and shielding, or you get enough ability power. But right off the bat, and I would say that most games are over at 1 to 2 items. I think this is a huge nerf. I'm really disappointed with this direction and change. I think it's very silly. To have the mythic passive be so lame as to just increase your legendary healing. Maybe what they should have done instead was to change the mythic passive to increase the stacking power of the healing and shielding instead. I think overall, though, this is something that they're trying to answer where they just basically don't want non-healing champions to build Moonstone. But I would argue that for the most part, nobody really is building Moonstone that frequently on non-enchanter champions, except for maybe we saw Lilia in the jungle and kind of Nidalee, but even Nidalee was healing. So this is a really weird change since it seems like it's just poorly timed. It doesn't really answer any of the problems that enchanters run into, and in fact exacerbate their weak power level by a significant margin. Also, certain champions will actually hate this item even more. So an example of this is like Lulu. Lulu actually only gets healing and shielding power from just her E. Her ultimate is actually considered a bonus health mechanic, so it actually isn't affected by healing and shielding increases. So this is a huge nerf to a lot of the enchanters that have actually kind of shown up as the premium supports to be picked. Not a fan of this change at all. I think it's a really bad change, bad direction, and I think the numbers are super off too. Next up is going to be Staff of Flowing Water, and we kind of pull this together in tandem because of the changes that kind of occurred, right? So it's lost its movement speed and now has 20 ability haste. This means that this item is actually incredibly powerful to rush in a lot of situations because not only does it give you ability haste, but it gives your teammate ability haste. So if you have a lot of people that utilize ability haste very, very well, this might be a scenario where now enchanters might be actively encouraged to go Staff of Flowing Water first before Moonstone Renewer, just because of the fact that Moonstone Renewer has a bad mythic stacking passive nowadays. And the healing on it will be relatively a lot weaker. The main complaint that I have about this is, although I think this is a good power-up for Staff of Flowing Water to have the ability haste, this is really just there because of the fact that they took ability haste away from you from your mythic passive, which basically means that you have no flexibility when it comes to build paths anymore. You're kind of just forced into basically going Moonstone Renewer and Staff of Flowing Water in tandem together every time, because otherwise you'll be missing too much ability haste. I think the buff for the buff itself is really great, but the problem that I have now is that it doesn't really give you a lot of options and versatility when it comes to your build path, which I'm not a big fan of, because that was one of the big things that was supposed to happen in this season, was that you were supposed to have more versatile build paths, whereas nowadays you'll be so much starved for your ability haste that Staff of Flowing Water will probably just be a must build as your second on almost all enchanters. So I'm not a fan of it, even though I think the staff changes are actually pretty good, since I think that the movement speed was just kind of a weird stat to have in that location. Really great if you have a lot of ability cycling players, you have a lot of mages, etc. But it's a lot less strength in the power of just being able to move around and do stuff. So maybe there might be a lot more circumstances where if there's a lot of melee champions that you need to kite out, you go Staff of Flowing Water maybe even first, and then build into a Shirley second, and you just don't go Moonstone Renewer at all. There will definitely be reasons to take each of the support items now, but not for good reasons, just basically because of the fact that they're kind of gutting a lot of the power around some of the support items. Overall, I think this conceptually is a good idea, but I'm not as big of a fan of how the numbers turned out, or kind of some of the mythic passives that are going on. So those are my thoughts on it. I think in general, it's kind of just like a neutral scenario where you'll have a little bit more flexibility, but I think you'll heal a lot less, which means that just staying alive in fights means that your actual spells matter more so than just the Moonstone Renewer that you build. So overall, I think people will not notice this change that much in the early stages unless you're basically playing something that spams heals. So examples of this are things like Soraka or Sona might see actual, power-ups in terms of their strength. But if you play an enchanter that has, 5, 6 second, 10 second cooldown on your shielding or healing, you'll notice a significant drop in your power level for sure. Anyway, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment in the section below, and hit that bell and whistle. I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see you next time. Peace.